What if the very way we think about knowledge, progress, even wisdom has been shaped by, well, a single powerful force for the last 100 years, and maybe to the exclusion of so much else?
That's a huge question. A really provocative way to start thinking about the 20th century.
Exactly. And that's the kind of thing we're diving into today. Welcome back, where we, crack open these big, ambitious works and really explore the ideas inside.
It's good to be digging into this one.
So our mission today isn't just to give you a summary. We want to rigorously critique Peter Watson's The Modern Mind, an intellectual history of the 20th century. It's a monumental book.
Absolutely huge. And we need to identify its strengths, sure, but maybe more importantly, uncover its significant limitations.
Right. And just so you know, you're experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's NotebookLM for deeper, more dynamic book critique.
So yeah, get ready. We're aiming for a balanced perspective, hopefully letting you quickly grasp the nuances of this really ambitious intellectual history.
Okay, so let's set the stage first. The author, Peter Watson, what should people know?
Well, he's a British intellectual historian, also a journalist, and he was a senior editor for the Sunday Times. He's written extensively on cultural and intellectual history.
And that journalistic background, you can kind of feel it in the writing, can't you? That approach to scholarly synthesis.
Definitely. It shapes how he pulls together this vast amount of information, which is really evident in The Modern Mind, published back in 2001. And it's a behemoth, 864 pages.
Wow. 864 pages trying to cover the entire 20th century's intellectual life. Major writers, artists, scientists, philosophers.
Everything. From 1900 right up to the late 1990s. It's incredibly comprehensive in its scope.
How does he even structure something like that?
He breaks it down chronologically, 4 main parts. Starts with Freud to Wittgenstein, then moves to Spengler to Animal Farm.
Okay.
Then Sartre to the Sea of Tranquility, and finishes with the counterculture to Kosovo. So it's a clear path, but covering immense ground.
An ambitious structure for, like you said, an even more ambitious central argument. So let's get to that. What is the core thesis of this massive book?
This is where the real critique starts, I think. Watson's main argument, his central claim, is that the 20th century can basically be understood as a time where, and this is his phrase, the scientific method colonized all modes of thought and changed the way thinking is done.
Colonize. That's a really strong word. He's not just saying science was influential.
No, it's much stronger. He's arguing it became the dominant intellectual force. It pushed aside or fundamentally reshaped traditional humanity-centered thinking. It implies this systematic displacement of other ways of knowing.
That is a bold claim. And from that core idea, he makes some other major assertions, right?
Yeah, 3 big ones stand out. The first is obviously that main point. Science profoundly influenced and, yes, colonized all modes of 20th century thought.
Okay, number 1. What's the second?
Second, he asserts that Western intellectual traditions pretty much maintained their dominance, despite all the talk and efforts towards multiculturalism. He essentially says most of the truly new ideas still came out of the Western world. You know, the dead white guys he mentions.
Right, that's another potentially controversial point. And the third assertion?
The third one focuses on religion. He claims that religious fundamentalism acts as a major brake, a stifle on intellectual innovation. He even points specifically to Islam since the 1970s as an example of this.
Okay, so those are the big claims. Science colonized thought, the West stayed dominant, and fundamentalism stifles new ideas. Now, how does the evidence stack up? Did you feel he really proved these points?
Well, when we started digging into that, mapping his claims to his evidence, it got interesting. For the science colonization idea, he definitely provides a lot of examples. He traces how discoveries like relativity, quantum mechanics, genetics, psychology, how they clearly impacted philosophy, art, literature. You can see those connections.
You can see the influence, yeah. But what about the quality of that evidence? Was it deep analysis or more descriptive?
That's the key critique, I think. Our analysis showed he relies very heavily on secondary sources, on synthesis, not so much on original primary research. So it feels largely descriptive. He tells you what happened, connects the dots superficially sometimes, but often doesn't dig deep into the analytical how or why these shifts occurred in the way he claims.
Like painting a broad picture rather than dissecting the underlying mechanics.
Exactly. So when we used our framework to think about his claims, is it just opinion? Is it factual knowledge? Is it deeper understanding or even wisdom? We landed somewhere specific. That colonization metaphor feels more like an interpretive opinion.
Kind of opinion.
Yeah, a strong one based on observation, but we felt the evidence wasn't quite sufficient to prove such a systematic, wholesale displacement of all other forms of thinking. The evidence supports influence, definitely, but
Yeah.
colonization might be overstating the case based purely on his evidence.
Okay, so maybe strong on the description, less so on proving the full extent of that colonization claim. But what about factual knowledge? Names, dates, movements.
Oh, there he excels. Absolutely. On the level of knowledge, the book is encyclopedic. He successfully catalogs an incredible amount of factual information about 20th century intellectual developments. His knowledge of the secondary literature across disciplines is solid, no doubt about that.
So he knows his stuff, but does he connect it in a way that provides real understanding? Beyond just listing the facts.
That's where it gets a bit fuzzy again. He attempts synthesis, he tries to connect disparate movements like science influencing art, which we mentioned, but often it stays descriptive. He identifies connections but doesn't always fully explain the causal mechanisms, the deeper how and why. It leaves you wanting a bit more analytical depth sometimes.
So more what than why. What about the highest level? Wisdom, practical
Wow.
judgment about ultimate ends, the good life.
Yeah, our analysis suggested this is probably the book's weakest point in that framework. His clear enthusiasm for scientific rationality, while understandable, seems to inadvertently blind him to the potential value or contributions of non-Western intellectual traditions, or even the kind of wisdom found in religious thought. It doesn't really grapple with those ultimate why questions in a way that offers that broader perspective.
Interesting. So strong on knowledge, attempts understanding, but maybe falls short on proving the core opinion and doesn't really reach for wisdom.
That's a fair summary of how we saw it through that lens.
Now, let's talk about fairness. We applied a kind of golden rule test in our critique, didn't we? Asking how his methods would hold up if turned back on his own perspective.
Right. This was crucial. Take his point about non-Western intellectuals. He basically says, look, most scientific, literary, philosophical new ideas of the 20th century did indeed come out of the realm of dead white guys, the Western world.
Which might be statistically arguable in certain fields, but...
But the question is, would Watson accept his methodology, which systematically marginalizes non-Western contributions by primarily using Western criteria for what counts as an idea if that same method were applied to, say, British intellectual history? Would he find that fair? It raises questions about reciprocity.
That's a really good point. What about his claims regarding religious believers?
Similar issue. He claims, where emotional attachment to traditional faith endures, new ideas wither on the vine, and cites Islam since the 70s. Okay, but first, that seems like correlation presented as causation without deep proof.
And it ignores a lot of history, doesn't it?
It ignores vast swaths of religious intellectual tradition. Would Watson accept characterizing scientific materialism as just another faith tradition with its own limitations and dogma? It feels like an asymmetric standard is being applied. He doesn't seem to offer a nuanced understanding of these complex traditions.
You could argue, though, couldn't you, that some forms of strong traditional faith do inherently resist certain kinds of modern scientific or philosophical innovation? Isn't there some truth, even if overstated?
That's a fair challenge. Yes, absolutely. Certain interpretations or expressions of faith can create resistance to specific new ideas, particularly those perceived as challenging core tenets. But the critique wasn't that no tension exists. It was that Watson's broad-brush generalization about traditional faith stifling all new ideas is overly simplistic and ignores counter-evidence.
Like the Islamic Golden Age, or centuries of Christian scholasticism, or ongoing theological debates.
Precisely. He doesn't engage with the internal intellectual vibrancy within many religious traditions, nor does he adequately distinguish between different kinds of faith or fundamentalism. His claim sets up this stark opposition that history often shows to be much more complex and frankly collaborative at times. It creates an unfair standard where science is the norm and religion is the deviation.
Okay, that clarifies the critique. And what about how he treats humanities scholars?
He sort of suggests traditional liberal arts intellectuals made themselves obsolete by ignoring science. Again, we asked, would Watson accept a similar dismissal of historical methodology, his own field? It highlights this sort of privileging of one way of knowing over others.
It sounds like the critique found a consistent lack of reciprocity in his approach.
That's how it seemed, yes. Which led us to think about the broader civic implications. Does this book, with its perspective, help, say, form a more perfect intellectual union, establish justice between different ways of knowing, promote general welfare for all kinds of learners?
And the assessment wasn't great on that front, was it?
No. We scored it pretty low, around a 2.5 out of 6 on those civic goods. The argument was that its Western-centric view and somewhat dismissive tone towards other traditions tend to polarize rather than unify. It sets up intellectual hierarchies instead of establishing justice, and arguably benefits a narrow, secular, Western-educated elite more than promoting broad intellectual liberty for everyone.
That's quite a strong assessment of its potential impact. It really makes you think about how these grand narratives shape our understanding.
Absolutely. Thinking about how we think. It's complex.
It really is. And actually, as we navigate these complex ideas, it's a good moment to remember that understanding multiple perspectives is key to rational thought. That's precisely why we created Mindful Moments, our YouTube channel.
That's right. It offers AI, book analysis, summaries, and critiques, all designed to inspire reflection and clearer thinking. You can find more of our unique content there. Check it out.
Okay, so back to the critique of the modern mind. Beyond fairness, what about logical flaws or missing perspectives? Did the analysis find issues there?
Yes, several points came up. One clear one is a tendency towards a false dichotomy, particularly between science and religion.
Presenting them as fundamentally opposed.
Exactly, which, as we discussed, ignores long and rich traditions of religious intellectualism, the Islamic Golden Age, Jesuit scientists, ongoing theological philosophy. It simplifies a very complex relationship. It also kind of ignores the philosophical debates and limitations within science itself.
That makes sense. What else?
Hasty generalization, especially with the claims about religious fundamentalism stifling innovation. Generalizing from arguably limited examples without seriously considering counter-evidence or nuances across different faiths and cultures, it's just too broad a claim based on the evidence presented.
So jumping to conclusions based on limited data.
Kind of, and there's also an element of what looks like circular reasoning.
How so?
Well, it seems like Watson defines intellectual achievement or new ideas in terms that already privilege Western scientific approaches. Then, having defined it that way, he concludes that, surprise, surprise, Western science is superior or was the main driver. It's like the premise already contains the conclusion.
Setting the rules of the game so your team always wins.
A bit like that, yes. And this whole argument rests on what seems like an unsound premise. The assumption that the scientific method is the only legitimate path to real knowledge.
Which is a philosophical position in itself, right? Not a proven fact.
Absolutely. It lacks solid philosophical justification and completely sidesteps major epistemological debates, even within the philosophy of science. It's a very narrow view of what constitutes valid knowledge or understanding, like saying only novels are real literature and ignoring poetry or drama.
You miss so much richness that way.
You do. And because of this narrow focus, the book suffers from missing counterarguments. Watson doesn't really engage seriously with critiques of scientism, the belief that science is the only source of knowledge. He doesn't grapple with postmodern challenges to scientific authority, or really explore non-Western epistemologies in any depth.
So he presents his narrative strongly, but doesn't really address the major criticisms or alternatives to his worldview.
Largely no. The counterarguments aren't given much space or serious consideration.
Okay, so if we accept this critique, the biases, the logical issues, the narrowness, what are the broader implications? What are the potential consequences of this kind of scientific triumphalism, as you called it?
Well, thinking long-term socially, it could worsen cultural polarization. That
Right.
gap between scientific or secular communities and religious or traditional ones might widen if this view becomes dominant.
And it risks marginalizing those wisdom traditions we talked about, right?
Yeah.
The ones that offer non-scientific approaches to meaning or ethics.
Exactly. And that could lead towards a more technocratic way of thinking about governance, where technical expertise is valued far above, say, practical wisdom, ethical judgment, or historical perspective.
Are there economic implications too?
Potentially, yes. This framework naturally tends to support meritocratic systems that heavily favor those with scientific and technical training. It could further devalue humanities, education, arts, traditional crafts, anything not easily quantifiable or fitting the scientific mold.
And spiritually, or perhaps existentially.
From that perspective, a purely secular materialism, which Watson seems to champion, offers very few resources for tackling those ultimate questions of meaning, purpose, transcendence. Questions that, for many people, remain incredibly important. Ignoring them or dismissing them as irrelevant represents a kind of impoverishment of our collective intellectual life.
Leaving a void where those deeper human questions used to be explored.
Precisely. And think about the intergenerational impact. If future generations are primarily taught this narrative, this kind of scientific reductionism, they might inherit a really truncated view of human intellectual history. Their understanding of human possibility gets narrowed.
That's a sobering thought. Okay, so after this deep critique, let's try to pull it together into a balanced conclusion on the modern mind. It's not all negative, surely. What are its undeniable strengths?
Oh, absolutely not all negative. Its first strength is its sheer encyclopedic scope. Watson demonstrates a truly remarkable breadth of knowledge across so many different intellectual fields. It's impressive.
And it's accessible, isn't it, for such a dense topic?
Very much so. That's the second strength. Accessible synthesis. He presents incredibly complex developments in engaging, readable prose. He makes 20th century thought approachable for a general educated audience. That's a real skill.
And the comprehensive coverage itself is a strength.
Yeah.
He really does map out the major movements, the key figures, the significant ideas across the century. You get a roadmap.
A very detailed roadmap. And fourth, he absolutely correctly identifies and highlights the profound impact that scientific discoveries had on the broader intellectual culture. You cannot understand the 20th century without understanding the role of science. He gets that right.
Okay, so scope, synthesis, coverage, and recognizing science's impact. Those are significant strengths. But the weaknesses we discuss are also substantial. Let's recap those.
Right. First, the methodological bias. That heavy reliance on secondary sources, the lack of deep primary research. His journalistic background shows it's encyclopedic, but sometimes the treatment feels a bit superficial, analytically speaking.
And the Western-centric perspective,
Yeah.
even though he kind of acknowledges it.
He acknowledges it, but he doesn't really develop a methodology to fairly assess non-Western contributions. So, despite the nod, it remains fundamentally a story of Western intellectual development, told largely through a Western lens.
Which leads to that scientific reductionism we talked about.
Yes. The colonization metaphor, while punchy, ultimately overstates science's total dominance and understates the continued vitality and importance of the humanities, the arts, religious thought, and other ways of knowing. It reduces the complexity.
And you mentioned historical determinism.
Right. There's a sense that he presents the century's developments almost as an inevitable march towards scientific rationality, rather than as complex, contingent historical events that could have gone differently. It lacks a sense of contingency.
So overall, the critique suggests it functions more like high-level intellectual journalism than deep, rigorous historical analysis.
That's a fair way to put it. So to sum up the whole critique, The Modern Mind is undoubtedly a valuable book, impressive in its scope, but it's also significantly flawed. It provides incredible coverage, but promotes a scientific worldview that marginalizes crucial dimensions of human intellectual heritage.
And that central thesis about scientific colonization.
Ultimately, it seems to reflect Watson's own ideological commitment to scientific materialism more than it represents a fully balanced, evidence-based historical analysis.
Okay, that's a clear summary of the critique.
Yeah.
So reflecting on all this, what does it mean for you, the listener, as a learner, navigating the 21st century? This deep dive leaves us with some big unresolved questions, doesn't it?
It really does. Like, how do we fairly assess intellectual contributions across vastly different cultural traditions? How do we move beyond using just one yardstick, usually a Western one?
And what are the proper boundaries, if any, between scientific inquiry and other modes of knowing, philosophical, artistic, spiritual? Are they completely separate? Can they inform each other?
Can the scientific method alone truly provide all the resources we need for human flourishing? Or are other forms of wisdom, other ways of understanding value and purpose, absolutely essential?
And for historians or thinkers trying to synthesize big periods like this, how do you balance that necessary breadth, that encyclopedic scope, with the analytical depth needed for genuine understanding, not just cataloging?
These are tough questions, no easy answers.
Definitely not. But asking them is crucial. And for those of you who want to explore these complexities further, we do have some resource recommendations.
Yeah, for primary sources, maybe look at something like Albert Einstein's correspondence. You see how a scientific giant grappled with philosophy and religion. Or Mortimer J. Adler's work on truth and religion. Max Weber's Science as a Vocation is classic.
And for alternative perspectives, critiques of modernity or secularism.
Thinkers like Alistair MacIntyre, his book After Virtue is hugely influential. Charles Taylor's A Secular Age is massive but essential. And for a non-Western perspective engaging modernity and tradition, Said Hossein Nasr's Knowledge in the Sacred is profound.
There are also other great intellectual histories that offer different viewpoints. Jacques Barsoun's From Dawn to Decadence, Christopher Dawson on religion and Western culture, Joseph Needham's incredible work on science in China.
Lots to explore. We'll put a list with links in the description for you.
And just as an addendum, this comprehensive critique you've heard was informed by a systematic and precise framework we developed, specifically designed to provide a deep, balanced analysis of complex intellectual works like this one.
It helps ensure we're thorough and fair in our assessments.
Exactly. And for more insights like this, don't forget to explore Mindful Moments on our YouTube channel and check out our podcast for similar deep dives into important books and ideas.
We hope these discussions help you think more critically and rationally.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, engaging critically with ambitious, challenging books like The Modern Mind, acknowledging their strengths and weaknesses, is just vital if we want to truly understand the incredibly complex, multifaceted tapestry of human thought. It's about seeing all the threads, not just the brightest ones.
Well said.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Click the link on screen for the in-depth book analysis. Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.